This week on Jerusalem Dateline, we begin our 10th season of Jerusalem Dateline and look back on 20 years of broadcasting for CBN from Israel and the Middle East, how the Israel Defense Forces and Christian volunteers reached out to their Muslim neighbors, how Christians suffered terribly under ISIS, and how groundbreaking discoveries and prophetic events continue to make history and fulfill the Bible. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. On today's program, we'll be looking back at some of the most memorable stories in our 20 years of broadcasting here in the Middle East. With over 20 years of reporting from Jerusalem, CBN News has had the privilege to report on the front lines of Israel's history and of the Middle East. In this edition, we bring you some of the stories we thought were significant over that time. We begin with the Mission of Mercy by the Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF. CBN News was given an exclusive look at what was then a secret IDF mission. It was a one-of-a-kind Middle East story that combines the IDF, Christian medical personnel on the front lines, and the brutality of the Syrian civil war. The story begins here on the Golan Heights in the dead of night. Israeli soldiers inside Syria providing hope in the form of life-saving medical supplies for Syrians caught in a long and bloody civil war. Their partner? A Christian aid group called Frontier Alliance International, or FAI.
We support the state of Israel, and we love the Jewish people. So to be able to engage the Syrian crisis through the Israeli border in cooperation with the Israeli army is a huge privilege for us as an organization.
On this night, Dr. Sally Parsons and trauma nurse Debbie Dennison returned from a 7-week tour of duty in a Syrian village.
This was a long trip too.
Yeah. It was very good though, very good.
Lots of trauma coming in, brought in another head injury.
Parsons and Dennison served in this makeshift hospital.
Why did you go in?
Because the Lord calls us into all the world, to all the nations. But I specifically felt God told me this was what I was supposed to be doing.
Parsons, a surgeon for 30 years, faced procedures she never did before. When the team didn't know what to do, they turned to prayer and even YouTube.
How many incisions? 3? How many compartments
well, it is in
are you
you got me. I think it's probably 2, but cutting the skin. Okay, so they're just going lateral.
And then we downloaded a YouTube for a cesarean section, and we did that, and I prayed a lot more than I read.
During her career, Parsons had never performed a C-section. In Syria, she did 6.
And I have to tell you, when I delivered that first little baby, I could just feel his hands on my hands. It's what sustained us, to be able to see new life in the midst of such horrific war was just a blessing beyond belief.
Dennison found a hidden beauty beneath the veil of the Syrian women.
In the women's exam room, they would take off that burqa and they would reveal their faces. And it was so miraculous to me because they were no longer hidden, but the beauty of these people would come out, these women, and it was no longer someone without a personality, but it was a woman with a life, and it was a woman with her children. We met them in their glory, we met them in their beauty, we met them in their pain. And it was an amazing experience for me.
Parsons and her team sent the worst cases back to Israel. Their mission is part of a larger project called Good Neighbor, where Israel provides food, fuel, water, and medical treatment across the border. So far, Israel has treated more than 5,000 Syrians in Israeli hospitals. Israeli Major Sergei serves as the Good Neighbor Chief Medical Officer.
Why do you do this?
From one side, this is a very simple question. I can see the other side of the border that's starved in his place and don't bring him the help. This is a huge situation that they live there, and this is my point. This is my opportunity to bring them help where they need this. I'm very proud to do this.
I don't know of another military in the world who would prioritize affectionate engagement with their enemy to build a good neighborhood. What the IDF has done over the last 5 or 6 years since the the revolution started, has said, hey, let's put politics to the side and let's seek to build a good neighborhood by being good neighbors.
I'm very proud to be in this point. I must to tell thank you for the FIA organization about that they bring the high professional medical staff to help to the Syrian side. This is not as simple, and I am, especially as an Israel officer, I'm very proud to be in this situation.
Most of the wounded come here to Nahariya Hospital in Israel. We dressed up in gown and gloves to sit down with these Syrian men who received not only a physical healing, but a transformation of the heart. We concealed their identity for their own protection.
Once I arrived in Israel, my point of view of the Israeli people changed completely. I was told that Israel is the bad guy, that Israel is the enemy. Now I know that it's just the opposite. I thank God I arrived in Israel in time, because if I had not come here, I wouldn't be alive.
The team changed the Syrians' view about Christians.
Before, I thought that Christians were bad people, but I found out that they are good people, and they helped me.
During the mission, they faced barrel bombs like this one and took shelter some 60 times. They even faced this Russian MiG.
I considered that I could lose my life there, but I considered that if he called me there, he was going to sustain me through that, and that everything was going to be fine.
You had to count the cost. You had to say, do I love you enough that I'm willing to lay down my life? Of course. And my answer was yes.
Thomas calls them heroes.
These are laid down, selfless, incredibly Christ-like people. The author of Hebrews said, these are of whom the world is not worthy. I think these people are of whom the world is not worthy.
Other teams are operating inside Syria now, and the joint project is growing. Thomas says Christians can help.
First of all, pray, make intercession. Jesus was clear, pray to the Lord of the harvest, send forth laborers. Secondly, come. If you're a medical professional, if you love the Lord, and if you can handle these circumstances, you can work in a team in an environment like this. We want you and we need you.
Some consider this a genuine Middle East peace plan. Jews helping Christians, helping Muslims.
People are people, no matter what label we put on them, Muslim or Christian or Jew, but underneath their label, they're men and they're women that have the same needs. They have the same pains and the same hurts that we do, and they need the same compassion and love. No matter what the barriers, all people respond to love. And we were, as Christians, going into a community, they didn't know us, they have a historic animosity towards Christian, but all it took was an expression of love, and we were welcomed with open arms.
Up next, a look at the plight of Christians in the Middle East during the reign of terror by the Islamic State. One of the most tragic stories of the Middle East has been the rise of Christian persecution. When ISIS, the Islamic State, conquered large parts of northern Iraq and Syria several years ago, thousands of Christians fled for their lives. Those who remained face daunting challenges. Here's our report from Kurdistan. As ISIS captured cities and towns, they gave Christians 4 choices: leave, stay and pay the Islamic tax for non-Muslims, convert to Islam, or die. Most left. Many of the Christians who fled ISIS didn't find refuge in many of the larger refugee camps, but instead they found refuge here in small neighborhoods in Erbil and throughout Kurdistan. This is where one of the churches meets for their worship service. They come from Mosul, ancient Nineveh, and the Christian town of Karakosh. Many with similar stories about ISIS.
At the end of the city, ISIS had a checkpoint. They put a gun to my head and said, whatever you have in your pockets, take it out. One of our neighbors told us they killed your cousin because he was a Christian. They told us we had to leave.
The transition from a normal life to a refugee has been hard.
In such kind of circumstances, it's really hard for families to live all together. For example, we came here and found out we would be living in a small apartment with 5 or 6 families. It was very difficult for us.
CBN News interviewed the pastor 1 year ago. Now he continues to shepherd his flock.
First, we came here for about 8 months. I was asking all the charity and humanitarian organizations to visit the people, and the only reason behind it was giving out the Word of God to the people. So God showed me His Word is not only words, but actions.
Even when the electricity goes out, a common occurrence in Erbil, the service goes on. Like Christians around the world, they gratefully celebrate communion.
God has moved us and saved us from Karakosh to here. That means He was faithful to us. But right now, we need a faithful heart. So please pray for us to have a faithful heart.
I'm really proud of the Christians because the Christians, they left everything behind and they followed Christ.
Most ask for prayer.
The Christians of Iraq, they need the other parts of the world to pray for them because they're really in need spiritually, physically, and emotionally. They really need to pray for us to live in peace and experience the peace of Jesus.
Miriam, the 10-year-old girl seen by thousands on the internet for forgiving ISIS, came to the service, still sharing her childlike faith.
Whatever situation we are in, it is because God allowed it. We don't know how to deal with this life unless we have Jesus with us.
Coming up, a look at the road called the Biblical Superhighway and where Jesus would have walked. Throughout the last 20 years, archaeologists have continued to uncover artifacts that support what's written in the Bible. One of the biggest proofs is what they found in the city of David. They call it the Biblical Superhighway, the pilgrim's path that led to the Jewish temple in ancient times.
The places and events and the peoples that make Jerusalem, Jerusalem. For Christians, for Jews, it all happened here in the city of David. This is where the beating heart of Jerusalem is. We're talking about the Pool of Siloam. We're talking about Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. We're talking about the city of David. The pilgrimage road links them all together.
For Jews in ancient days, their pilgrimage began here at the Pool of Siloam. It's a mikveh or ritual bath. It's the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools. They would purify themselves here before going up to the Temple Mount to worship God.
The historian Josephus says that 2,000 years ago, on the pilgrimage festivals, there would have been more than 2 million people going up on pilgrimage. That's a lot of people who need to bathe.
The pool is also where Jesus healed the blind man, as recounted in the book of John. Its location was hidden by a road until 15 years ago, when a sewage leak led to excavations, the discovery of the pool, and much more.
The archaeologists, when they find the Pool of Siloam, so they understand if that's the pool, and they know where the temple stood on the Temple Mount some 2,000 years ago. The same Temple Mount is today.
Zev Orenstein with the City of David Foundation says archaeologists wondered how the pilgrims traveled from the pool to the Temple Mount.
So the archaeologists widened the excavation, and we are standing on the very answer to that question. We are standing atop the ancient pilgrimage road.
These are the stones that Jesus would have walked on his way up to the temple. And now the significance of the excavation of the pilgrimage road is that for the first time in 2,000 years, visitors will be able to walk all the way from the Pool of Siloam up to the Western Wall.
The word in the Bible, the Hebrew words, is aliyah l'regel, or ole regel. Now what we understand that to mean is it's a spiritual ascent. You're going up to the temple, going to Jerusalem. It's a very holy place. But Chris, when you're in the place where the Bible happened, the words of the Bible come to life. Because as we're walking right now, and I'm sure you could feel it, we're walking uphill.
And it was more than that.
This would have been like Times Square. You would have had on both sides of the road, and keep in mind, the road is about 3, 4, 5 times wider than what we see over here. You would have had shops, stalls along both sides of the road. This is the center of Jerusalem from a spiritual perspective, from a communal perspective, also from a commerce perspective.
According to the Israel Antiquities Authority, the road took 10 years to build, from 20 to 30 AD, and was constructed by Pontius Pilate.
One of the major issues of Jerusalem is that it's a living city. All the layers, all the archaeological layers are built on top of one another, and the modern living quarters and everything is built on top of the archaeological layers.
Excavation manager Ari Levy says uncovering the road is a major engineering feat.
We have modern neighborhood just above our heads, and we don't want it to collapse. After each meter that we take out, each meter of soil, we enter an arch-like construction like this. This supports the entire weight of what we have above us.
Along the route, you can see many places where the road remains intact and others where it's destroyed, given its violent history.
We know that the Romans, they destroyed Jerusalem. And if you would find everything perfectly intact, well, it wouldn't seem like much of a destruction.
Among the discovered treasures are small coins minted during the Great Jewish Revolt, before the Romans destroyed the Temple and Jerusalem in 70 AD. Scholars often wonder why the Jews made worthless coins instead of weapons. Orenstein has the answer.
Jews of Jerusalem understood that the Romans were likely going to destroy the city. But they also believed that one day in the future, their descendants would return and find these coins, and they would know what their ancestors lived and died for a free Jerusalem. And here we are nearly 2,000 years later, standing along the very same pilgrimage road here in the city of David, in Jerusalem, the capital of the Jewish state of Israel.
Half of the pilgrimage road will open soon to the public, and within a few years, all the way from the Pool of Siloam to the Western Wall. That will give visitors a first-hand experience of what it was like to worship God in the time of Jesus. Coming up, a first-hand look at the prophetic return of the Jewish people to the Promised Land. In Hebrew, it's called Aliyah, the Jewish people returning to the Promised Land. And since the founding of the state, more than 3 million Jews from around the world have immigrated to Israel, and they just keep coming. We traveled from Israel to Ukraine for a close-up look at this prophetic story in action. In the early morning, 130 Ukrainian Jews landed in Tel Aviv to begin a new life. Many see the moment when these new immigrants step onto the tarmac here at Ben Gurion Airport as the time when the words of the Bible written thousands of years ago come to life.
There has never been a people who have been exiled for so long who then return to their homeland, return to their language. And so there's the prophetic reality of this that's so huge that each one of these people, Isaiah saw, Jeremiah saw, they saw them, they saw this happening, and now we are here to witness it. We are here to be part of it.
Their flight marked the one-year passing of Yael Eckstein's father, Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, the founder of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, now simply called the Fellowship.
He always felt a calling, that it wasn't him, but God working through him to unite Christians and Jews, to bring biblical prophecy to fruition.
Although their trip ended in Tel Aviv, the life-changing journey began more than 1,000 miles and a number of choices away. We wanted to find out why they made their decision.
We know that Israel is the best place because we have also our relatives there, friends.
Israel has many advantages. It's much safer. You just can go out at midnight and feel perfectly safe.
Some saw opportunity, like 53-year-old Eugene.
I know in Israel I have a future. I have job, I have pay.
For some, it was a matter of faith.
It's decision not only mine, it's decision of God. It's decision for my family.
The fellowship helped smooth the way by providing documentation, logistics, and finances to bridge the gap from their lives in Ukraine to a new start in Israel. This orientation helped provide the information about their next step. Benjamin Haddad is director of Aliyah for the fellowship.
We want to get higher the joy and the hope and get less the afraid. But there is all the time this moment together in the hearts of the people, the frightened from the future, from the unknown, and the big hope and the happiness about new beginning, a new country, and a new future that is waiting for them.
Each person's belongings get a number, and they're permitted 70 kilos or just over 150 pounds to start their new life. With last-minute instructions and documents in hand, some headed back to their apartments for a last-minute goodbye. It's about 11 o'clock here in Kiev, just outside the Kavilenko apartment. They're loading their last belongings, and in a few hours they'll be on their way to Tel Aviv, but they haven't told most of their neighbors.
Only one neighbor from this home knows about my departure.
Only one neighbor?
Only one neighbor.
And because you don't want the other ones to know. But why? Why don't you want them to know?
Because people didn't like me, didn't want that me and my family will be happy.
Because you're Jewish?
Yes.
The hardest part was leaving her best friend. After they finished loading their luggage, a last hug and goodbye to their best friends. The family then headed to Kiev International Airport for a few more hours of waiting before boarding their plane. It's about a 3-hour flight from Kiev to Tel Aviv. But for most of the new immigrants on this plane, this flight will be the biggest step of their lives. A safe landing on a new land.
Now I appear in my real motherland. I returned with my children and my husband, and now I'm so happy, so proud. The most important thing in my life.
With threats to the Jewish people rising worldwide, Eckstein believes it's time for the Jews of the world to come home. The fellowship typically brings 5,000 Jews to Israel each year.
Sometimes I think that the reason why Isaiah said that the Jewish people would come home to Israel in the end of days is because he knew that anti-Semitism would once again raise its ugly head, and if they didn't come home to Israel, the only country where there's a Jewish government, where there's a Jewish army whose only concern is protecting the Jewish people, unlike anywhere in the entire world, that there wouldn't be any Jewish people left in the world because of all the anti-Semitism. And so I look at this as you never know when the borders are going to close. You never know when it's going to be too late. And so the fellowship, as soon as we have the opportunity to bring a Jewish person home, we do it immediately.
It's amazing to see prophecy unfold up close and personal. Well, that's a look back at some of the important stories we've covered over the years. The bravery of Christian volunteers, the compassion of the IDF, the tragic story of Christian persecution, and the groundbreaking archaeological stories. We'll be showing more stories in the future, but for now, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time.